What's the most heartbreaking sacrifice you've ever seen a parent make for nothing? I was coaching quarterbacks when the single mom called me at 10 p.m. begging me to train her son Will because a football scholarship was their only shot at college, and she offered to pay my full rate even though I could hear her calculating hours in the background. At the first session, she counted out $50 in fives and ones, while Will stood there in new cleats and she wore shoes held together with duct tape, explaining she'd arranged all three of her jobs around his training schedule. The problem started immediately because Will showed up exhausted and reeking of smoke. When I'd run him through drills, his form was decent, but his focus kept breaking like he was listening for something else entirely. I kept thinking, if I could just get him to concentrate for one full session, we'd make progress. After 2 weeks, his phone buzzed with an emergency tone during practice, and I saw his whole body tense before he deleted it. When I asked what that was, he said nothing, and went back to half-hearted throws that made me want to shake him, because I knew he could be great if he'd just try. I knew something was seriously wrong when Will showed up with burns on his throwing hand. When I demanded to know what happened, his phone started ringing. As soon as he answered on speakerphone, I heard someone say, "Great save last night, kid. That family is alive because of you." Will hung up fast, and I felt my stomach drop because I was starting to understand why this kid couldn't focus. His mom arrived early that day, and I watched her in the parking lot counting crackers from a sleeve and putting half back for tomorrow. When Will saw her, he muttered that she loved being dramatic about money, and I wanted to scream at him to look at what she was doing for him. That same session, Will's phone exploded with alerts, and each time he gripped the football tighter until he threw it so hard at the fence it burst. He said, "I can't do this," but then saw his mom watching from her car and came back, and I thought maybe guilt would be enough to make him try. I started noticing she'd lost about 20 pounds and always wore long sleeves even in heat, and Will admitted she'd been selling plasma twice a week to afford our sessions. I tried everything to get through to him, including showing him college highlights and talking about NFL dreams, but nothing worked. Then Will showed up with his arm bandaged from wrist to elbow and could barely grip the ball. I asked if he was okay to play, but he said his mom would lose it if he missed practice because she'd just taken a fourth job and skipped her own father's funeral to work a shift for his training money, and I felt sick knowing we were wasting her sacrifices. His throws were getting worse and worse, and I realized with horror that he was actively sabotaging his performance. When scouts showed up to watch, he deliberately fumbled snaps and threw interceptions, and I wanted to tackle him and demand to know why he was destroying his mother's life for nothing. Will finally missed a session completely, and his mom called sobbing, saying he'd been at the fire department all night pulling a 4-year-old from a burning trailer. She begged the chief to restrict his hours, but the chief said Will had saved 11 people and was their most dedicated teenage volunteer they've ever had. I arrived early the following week to find his mom passed out in her car with an eviction notice on the dashboard and empty energy drink cans covering the floor. When I knocked, she jerked awake, apologizing, saying she'd only meant to rest her eyes between jobs. Will pulled up and saw her scrambling to hide the eviction paper, and something died in his face like he was watching his last hope disappear. During practice, his phone rang with the fire station ringtone, and the screen showed "Structure fire, all hands." He stood there frozen, holding the football while looking between the phone and his mom watching from her car, and his hands were shaking before he declined the call and threw the next pass so hard I thought he'd torn something. His mom got out of the car and started walking over, saying, "Good job, baby, that was a perfect spiral." But Will turned to her with tears streaming down his face and screamed, "I just let people burn so you could watch me throw a stupid ball. Are you happy now?" His mom's face went white, and she frantically started listing everything she'd sacrificed, including selling her mother's wedding ring and sleeping in 24-hour laundromats and selling plasma until she had permanent scars and eating nothing but leftover fries from work. Will stared at her for a long moment and then said the words that still wake me up at night. "I never asked you to set yourself on fire to keep your dream alive, and now we're both burning." Will came to our last session after working fires all night, and I begged him to warm up, but he was too exhausted to listen. On his first throw, his knee popped like a gunshot. The torn ACL meant no scholarship, and he failed the firefighter physical because of his limp.